And today's the first Sunday of Kiahk. As you just heard, the tunes have changed, and we've moved into the feast of the time of Advent. And each fast, of course, in the church has a different purpose. The purpose of the Advent fast is to give us time to reflect on Christmas, on the birth of Christ, and what exactly it means that Christ came into the world. And the word Advent, in fact, just means exactly that, the arrival of a notable person or a thing or an event. So that's what we're doing, is we're prepping for this arrival. And today was the Annunciation of John the Baptist, and basically over the next 4 weeks we're going to read basically the first chapter of Luke and go through the different parts that led to the salvation and the story of the Incarnation. And the Incarnation is really just a story of restoration, of restoring what was meant. God created man for a purpose. He created him to be in his image and likeness, to be this special place and to have this special place. And then Adam, as we all know, lost his way. He sinned, he separated himself from God, and now he reaches a point where all of mankind reaches a point where we just can't see God anymore. We can't connect to him anymore. In some case, we don't even know who he is or who we are relative to him. And so man was supposed to have these godly characteristics in him. And just like a person has a kid, a child, you know, there's two pieces to a child. There's nature and nurture. And there's the nature part, there's just the genetics. Then, you know, that's your ears are the same, and you have the same eye color, and you have the same genetic markers as your child. Your child has the same one as you. And then there's the nurture part, where I become, through experience with my child, they start to take an imprint of me, right? They start to talk like me and think like me and deal with problems like I do. And this is what the image and likeness mean. Image and likeness are not redundant words. The image of God that we all have is these characteristics, these genetic, if you will, markers that we all have. And then we take on his likeness through life with him. We become like our fathers in that experience and being raised with our Father in our Father's house. And that process, that second piece, got shortchanged after the fall. So St. Athanasius, he wrote a very famous book called On the Incarnation. It's a classic that everybody should read. I recommend you try to read it during the feast of the fast of the Nativity. It's just one of those you can read over and over and get something new each time. But he says there's two real reasons why Christ was incarnated. And he said the first one is this knowledge of God. It's like we don't know who our dad was. And the way you can kind of think about it, if we want to go through a little, thought, is it's as if, this great dad has this, son, and they live in this great house. And the idea is that this son who has great genes is going to be great like his dad because he's raised in this great household. I kind of sound like Trump. And then something goes wrong, right? Something goes wrong. It's as if someone goes in and kidnaps this child, right? A band of thieves, and they take him to their lair or whatever, and they start raising this child instead of this great father. So the son has all these genetic markers, but he's being raised by a pack of thieves, and they're cursing and doing all these horrible things. And so the father doesn't know what to do. And he wants his son to know who he is. And, he wants his son to know, like, we don't talk like that, and we don't think like that, and we don't act like that. And so what's happening is, instead of this son absorbing his dad's characteristics, he's absorbing the characteristics of the person who kidnapped him. And he's becoming like one of them. And this is what happened to us. It's like Satan took us and he tricked us into leaving the paradise where we were supposed to be in communion with our Father. And now Satan was the one teaching us. And this is the story. This is the story of all of mankind, is this fall. And so now I'm living in this horrible place. And so what's the Father to do? Well, the Father basically said, you know what, I'm gonna dress up and I'm gonna go into this lair. And I'm going to, instead of bringing my kid out, which I can't really do right now, I'm going to go in and I'm going to live with him in that dungeon. And I'm going to tell him who his dad is. And I'm going to teach him who his dad is. And so this is really the first point of the incarnation, is to come and say, let me know you, let me tell you who your Father really is. Let me tell you what he's really like. And so the Father wants to express to us who he is, so he sends the Son. And the Son teaches us who the Father is. But in the case of the fall, the case with Adam is a little bigger than that even. And that was the second reason that St. Athanasius says the incarnation happened, is that not only did the Son fall and is now learning about, learning how to be a man from a den of thieves, but in the process of falling, something happened. And St. Athanasius uses this word over and over. He says corruption happened. We got corrupted. Our nature got corrupted. And at some level, it was irreversible. It wasn't simple enough to say, well, just repent. No, some process started. And the way we can think about this corruption, the way St. Athanasius sort of talks about it, is if you imagine taking some yogurt, out of the fridge and leaving it outside for a couple of days, right? What happens, right? It starts to get moldy and bad. And at that point, the yogurt's corrupted. You can go put it back in the fridge, but it's not going to get uncorrupted. It's going to remain corrupted, and maybe it'll stabilize, but it'll stay like that. And so you can't just skim off the mold. It's bad. And so as a human, what would we do? We would just throw it away and buy another one at Albertsons. But God wasn't about to do that with us because he loved us too much. So what did he do as God? What could he do? He can go back and recreate it. And this is what Christ does. He came back into the world, enters into our life of corruption, and then recreates us. The incorruptible unites with the corruptible. And in so doing, we take on this characteristics of incorruption. So with God's grace, I want to meditate today on a quote I heard that I really loved. It said, Christ came into the world to judge it through his presence. Christ came into the world to judge it through his presence. And so let's start with the first part. Christ came into the world. Another way to say this, and it's actually the title of a book that I really like by Father Matthew the Poor. The book is called Love Took Flesh. Love Took Flesh. And that title really, really hit me. And in the book, Father Matthew writes about the birth of Jesus. He says, this is God's day and not a human day. One can say that the joy of the nativity is equal to the joy of 1,000 years of human joys if they were to be combined together. Wow. And that phrase really hits you. And one of the things I love about being in the United States during Christmas season is everyone's so festive. It's so festive. There's lights, there's Christmas carols, there's all kinds of decorations. Yeah, there's a lot of materialism, but let's put that on the side. And one of the songs that I really like to hear is Joy to the World. The Lord is come, let earth receive her King. And then it says, and heaven and nature sing. Heaven and nature sing. And this last line is exactly what Father Matthew the Poor says. And he makes this beautiful expression. He says, heaven rejoiced at the nativity. The earth became a joy for the heavens, and consequently, and this is the part I want you to hear, the angels came out of their eternal silence and shared with us their joy. The angels came out of their eternal silence. It's like these angels have been sitting silent and quiet and hidden for tens of thousands of years, and they couldn't take it anymore. They broke their silence. They appeared, and they had to cry out, glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth, goodwill towards men. So what's the big deal? Why did the angels in this moment break their silence when Christ was born? And what does the nativity reveal about the nature of God? It reveals the divestment of God. When you divest something is when you give something that belongs to you to somebody else. It revealed humiliation. It revealed condescension of God, coming down. It revealed a God that was truly humble in a way that nobody could imagine. It literally means he lowered himself to someone else's level. It's something else. Imagine if Emba Tawedros, our patriarch, walks in today, and he comes in and he sits on the floor. And then a bunch of kids start jumping on him, and he hands them a Orban, and he's playing with the kids, and the kids are all over him. We'd be like, wow, he's a pretty humble guy. He's just sitting on the floor and the kids are jumping on him. It's like he condescended from this very high level of who he actually is down to the level of these kids. But of course, he's just a regular guy. Pope Tewodros, he's just a man. But Christ wasn't just a man. He, in fact, was not just a man. He was God himself. And yet he condescended, and not just to any place, but to a manger, to something, leaving his rightful place above the cherubim and coming down to earth. And so let's do another thought exercise. What if Emba Tewodros, we found out he was coming today to visit, HTC, and then Abuna walked in the morning and he found some homeless people sitting in the corner. And then he found some drug addicts shooting up in the bathroom. And he found some fecal matter in the corners and the floor. What would we do before Emba Tewodros showed up? Well, we'd clean it up, right? We'd immediately call a cleaning person, we'd get them thrown out, we'd get the place cleaned up because Emba Tewodros was coming. Certainly we wouldn't want to see Emba Tewodros to see all of that. And that's a normal human response. We'd be embarrassed if he came in and he saw all of these things. This is a human instinct that's very reasonable. We clean up our houses before people come over. But yet Christ's approach was very different than that one. He didn't wait for the earth to get cleaned up before he came into it. He didn't wait for the humans to get their act together first. He chose instead to come into the darkness, to come into brokenness, came into the world when it was still broken and sick. And he continued this approach in his ministry. He looked for these people, the most broken people, the most sick people in his entire life. And that's what he was attracted to. He sat with them, he smiled with them, he ate with them, he drank with them, he talked with them. He gave them what is his and took what is theirs. And so when he came into the world, he condescended from his heavenly glory, and then he came into a manger. A manger is a place that's full of animals, like a barn. I mean, it makes for great pictures and great Christmas cards. It's very cute. You got a little donkey, little cow. But what does a manger smell like? It's terrible. Right? What's a manger full of? So we just agreed that if Emba Tewodros was coming and there was fecal matter on the floor, we would clean it up first. But yet Christ, when he came in, he didn't insist on that. He came in to a manger full of poop. And he didn't insist that it be cleaned up first. And so how do I receive this Christ during this Advent into my manger? My manger, that's filthy, broken, sick. Do I need to clean up my manger first? Do I have to say, hang on, don't come in yet, I got to clean up? Or do I just invite him in? Do I just say, come in? Come into my filth and my brokenness and everything that's inappropriate. And you could tell him, Lord, I don't want you to come in because my manger is really disgusting and it's really dirty and it's really full of animals. But then again, so is everyone else's. And that's okay. And the lesson he teaches us is I will come into that manger. Why? Because my presence will clean it up. So each person in this church is a different manger. And each manger looks different, and each of us have different kinds of issues and different kinds of brokenness. And then yet Christ says, I will come into that brokenness and that darkness, and you just have to invite me in, as it says in the book of Revelation. Okay. Have any of you ever been to the Tahuna in Egypt? The windmill? Anyone? A few people? It's the place where Pope Kyrillos lived. And he lived there for several years as a hermit. And if you've ever been to it, it's nothing to look at. It's just a bunch of bricks. It's not well constructed. It kind of smells. It's not great. It's decrepit. It's ugly. It's not much architecture. But yet we say what? Pope Kyrillos lived there. And because Pope Kyrillos lived there, I go, and thousands of people go, pilgrims, tourists, thousands a year go to see that place and to take that blessing. And can you imagine if we found the actual manger where Jesus was born? What would it look like? Probably pretty old, decrepit, probably still smelly, but we'd say, Christ was born in there. That's an amazing place. And even more so, imagine the manger at the time Jesus is in it. Imagine going to the outside of that manger and saying, that manger, oh, it's terrible, it's got animals, it stinks, but I would tell you, the Lord of Lords is inside there right now. The King of Kings is in there right now. So right now I want to encourage all of you during this Advent season to not just see each other, but to see mangers. Mangers, in fact, that are broken down, decrepit, smelly, sick in some way, but mangers of your fellow man where Christ himself lays. The season of Advent is a time to focus on how we look at others. When we look from the outside, we just see the manger with all of its characteristics. And when we look at people that way, we speak badly about them, we gossip about them, we judge them, we don't think very highly of them, we think we're better than them. But others see Christ inside that manger. They don't see a disgusting place, they don't see a smelly place, they see the Lord of Lords laying there. And they're like, this manger is blessed. This manger is amazing. I want to take the blessing from this manger. Mother Teresa has this wonderful quote. She says, if everyone could see the image of God in his neighbor, do you think we would still need tanks and generals? She's basically saying there would be no war if I could see the image of God in my neighbor, if I could see Christ in everyone else's manger. All right, the second part of this, the quote is, Christ came into the world to judge it through his presence. The kind of humility Christ showed when he came into the world is really mind-boggling. It's beyond comprehension, and it lets us know what kind of God he is. I mean, we get caught up on the manger, but let's get rid of the manger for a second. What if Christ, when he was born into the biggest mansion in the world, 10,000 square foot mansion, and as soon as he was born, we hired 100,000 trumpeters to trumpet the coming of Christ. Imagine that. Forget the manger for a second. That would still be the most humble act in the history of earth, because God became a man. In fact, when you talk to someone who's Muslim and you say, why don't you believe in Christianity? That's the part they get hung up on. How could you humiliate God like that? They kind of have a point. It's beyond comprehension that God would condescend and be born out of a womb, come out crying like a baby, and then born in a manger. That kind of humility is just not something we can comprehend. And if I'm called to be the image and likeness of my dad, then should I not show this same kind of humility? And this is why, as the Bunametta says, the angels came out of their eternal silence. They couldn't take it anymore. When God became a man, it's like they broke. So how approachable is this God? How simple. He came not just as a human being, but as a homeless one, someone so approachable. That's what St. Macarius says. He says, the infinite, inaccessible, uncreated God assumed a body. And because of his ineffable kindness, if I may say so he diminished himself, lessening his inaccessible glory so as to be able to be united with his visible creatures, so that we can be partakers of this divine life. So I want you all to imagine a quote I heard once, what the world would be like if the gospel were true. What would the world be like if the gospel were true? And I want to conclude with this kind of thought. What if Christ really is who he said he is? what if he really is God? What if God really was born in a manger? And if God did all of these things, and I'm supposed to be this image of God and not just wear nice crosses, but actually carry that cross with him, I realized that Christ, in all of his decisions, he didn't come for power. He didn't come politically. He didn't come with money. He didn't tap any of the sources of power in the world. He didn't tap the clergy. He didn't tap money. He didn't tap politics. He didn't tap war. He didn't tap violence. None of the ways where we think of power. He did exact opposite. He inverted the power structure of the world. And the way he did it, it turns out, was he came in and he sat with us in our poopy mangers, in total humility, not judging, not asking, when are you going to change, how much longer, just sitting there and looking at us like no other human exists in the world. And I wonder if I'm called to be the image and likeness of God, if during this Advent season I can practice that. I can practice sitting with people and meeting them where they're at. Sitting with people in their brokenness, sitting with people in their filth, sitting with people in their disease, in their addiction, in their dungeons, sitting with them in love. So now that Cyber Monday's over, shopping is done, the emails have died down, you've bought all the stuff, we've gotten the materialism out of our system, great. We have a couple of weeks. Let's take the couple of weeks and let's contemplate on who this God is. And then by extension, who I am called to be. If he came down to that level, what am I supposed to do? Is it okay for me to find people where they are? Yes. Is it okay for me to condescend my ego, my will, my dignity, my glory? Yes. What if people are bad? What if they're annoying? What if they tell bad jokes? What if they're negative, they're obnoxious, they're hateful? Maybe they're not as smart as I am. Maybe they're not as thoughtful as I am. They're not as generous as I am. Certainly not as humble as I am. And what if they're addicted? What if they're caught in their disease and their sin? Is it okay for me to enter someone else's manger and help them clean the place up? Sure. Is it okay to sit with them in love? Sure. What if they don't respect and honor me? That's okay. They didn't respect and honor him either. All right. All right, I'll end. I'll end with the words of the gospel. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was quite specific about how to deal with difficult people. And so I encourage you during these next couple of weeks, the season of Advent, to think about who our Lord is and how I deal with difficult people. And so I'll read you from the Gospel of Matthew. If you want to close your eyes, you can. But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not stop him from taking your shirt. Give to everyone who asks of you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And do not repay evil for evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, as St. Peter says, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called to inherit a blessing. And glory be to God forever. Amen.